Okay, so there's one more circuit I should probably go over. Um, and that is there's a gated clock to some of these registers, like the accumulator, for example. The state flip-flops that we went over before, like fetch and defer and all those things clock every cycle. Okay, so you just have two inverters going to the clock input of the flip-flop. But things like the accumulator do not clock every cycle, right? So how does that circuit work? And it's a little tricky, but not too terribly difficult. So here we'll draw one bit of the accumulator, or it could be the link, but let's say it's one bit of the accumulator. So we'll say it's AC, accumulator some bit, I don't know, 3. So there's accumulator bit 3, for example, right? And it has its data input, and this is going to be I think actually there's the rotator here, um, and then the ALU output. So you could say from rotators and ALU, from rotators, and ALU. Okay. Now, what is going to this clock? That's the question. Now, we have to make sure that to keep the timing consistent, like we said before, there's the Raspberry Pi clock. We call that clock 2, or I call it clock 2, I should say, clock 2. And that says it has to go through two inverters before it gets to the flip-flop, because we want these all to be clock zeros. So it has to go through exactly two inverter times to get to here. Okay. Normally there's two inverters, right? For the state flip-flops and stuff, there's two inverters here. Okay, I'm not going to draw the second inverter, but there would be an inverter here and going to a state flip-flop. Okay, and you say, okay, well, to gate the clock, you could just throw an AND gate in there, but then that would add another gate delay in there, and we only want to stick with two. So we just get a little creative with this guy here and say, okay, well, we're just going to put a NOR gate in here. Little NOR gate, right? Boom. And stick that in there like that. Because if I keep this line high, okay, that's going to force the clock to stay low. When this pin is low, when it's a 0, then the clock is going to get through normally and have its 2 clock delay. So this is, our underbar clock 1, and then it will go through a second inverter and become clock 0, and it will have the same timing as the clock signals that go to the sequencer. So you want everything to kerchunk at the same exact time. Okay. Now, um, one thing about this signal is, when this clock, let's say that it's time for this clock to be high, right? So, well, it's going through an inverter, so this clock 1 would be low, right? And then we want this clock to be high at that time. So while this clock is low, if we want this clock to go through, this thing also has to be low. But we can't have this glitch at the same time, right? Because this signal here, if we just ran this to a bunch of gates that say, okay, well, this cycle we want the accumulator to load this cycle, then we could put this pin low, and then the clock signal will come by and go through. But then, these clock signals also clocking the sequencer and stuff, and so it's going to change its mind, right, to the next cycle, which might not want the accumulator loaded and all that sort of stuff. So this signal here will have glitches on it. If you just put gates into it, it'll glitch. And you can't have any glitches on the clock input, because then the flip-flop would trigger more than once, which is bad news. So we can't have that. So this signal here has to be glitch free. Okay, and to make a glitch free signal, we use another flip-flop. okay, because the flip-flop will turn on and turn off, okay, without glitches on the output, assuming you met setup and hold times. If you don't meet setup and hold times, yeah, right around the clock time it can glitch. But assuming you've met setup and hold times, which I'll show you how it's done, you can put a flip-flop here, and then we'll know that we're not going to get glitches. Okay, so here we're going to draw T and T up here like we normally do. Okay, so the timing on this now. So we have clock 2 coming along, and we want to draw a couple of clock cycles with clock 2. This shows up, yep. Okay, so this is the clock coming from the Raspberry Pi. We'll draw a couple of good cycles here. All right, and then clock 1, underbar clock 1, is the inverse of that, and delayed a little bit, of course, because it goes through a tube to compute it, invert that signal, so it's going to be like that, delayed a little bit, right? I'll get this drawn here. Okay, now the sequencer is going to say, oh, maybe I want to have the accumulator loaded at the end of this cycle here. So let's say this is what, TAD 3 or something like that, right? TAD 3. TAD 3 is when the ALU is actually doing the addition of adding the accumulator to the operand that it read from memory on the cycle before it, which is in the memory address register. But it's actually doing that addition, and the value is working its way through the tubes, doing all the carries and all of that stuff. And by the time it reaches the end of this cycle, okay, the addition is done, addition is ready. We'll say addition complete about this time. Okay, so the addition has to complete about this time, and see, we're going to get Kerchunk, and maybe this is the next fetch cycle or interrupt acknowledge for the next instruction. So we want the accumulator to get loaded with that value. We want this, to be all ready here. Here's your data coming in from the routers with, the addition values coming in, and we want this to Kerchunk right at this point, okay? So that's when we want this clock pulse or clock edge to be a nice positive edge right at that time. And so it will load this value in from the ALU that's finished the addition, right? Okay, so now with this TAD3 instruction, part of, if you look in the source code for the sequencer module, it's going to show, okay, when it's TAD3, we want the ALU signal to, we want the accumulator to be loaded with the output of the ALU. And there's a signal on there that says AC underscore ALU. Okay? And this signal is going to be asserted, well, not right at this edge here. It's going to be asserted sometime in here, because it takes a little while for the tubes to compute that, oh yes, this cycle should have ACALU in it. That this cycle wants to write the accumulator with the value coming out of the ALU at the end of the cycle. And then the next cycle is going to be like fetch 1 or int ac 1 or something like that. And it does not write the accumulator. Okay, so the signal is going to drop down to 0. Okay. But like I mentioned above, this is coming out of a bunch of gates, right? There are a bunch of gates that figure out what cycles the AC is going to be at. So we can say, oh, this is probably pretty glitchy here, and this might be kind of glitchy here. So, and we don't want any of these glitches getting into this clock signal. If we just ran this AC ALU signal right into here, Okay, it would be glitchy when this clock is high. Okay, the clock signal, is high, or this one would be low at the time, and this glitchiness would get through this gate, and we don't want that. We don't want this thing toggling more than once while all this glitchiness is happening. We want a nice clean clocking edge there for that. So what we do is run this AC ALU signal into this flip-flop here, AC underscore ALU. Okay, and then we clock this flip-flop here. All right. So what that does is look at this nice clean AC ALU signal when the clock is inverted. Oh, look how nice that looks. Nice, no glitchiness by now, right? So here you're going to get this, I think they call this the ACG, AC gated clock, ACG, for accumulators gated clock signal. Okay, so actually that's the inverted one. So I'm going to write down here is going to be ACG, because you want this one active low because it's a NOR gate functioning as an AND. So this one will be underbar ACG. Okay, and we'll figure out the Q's and the not Q's in a second here. All right, so look at that nice AC signal there. So here's going to be your ACG, right? It's going to be come along 0 beforehand. Oh, there comes that clock edge. Nice glitch, no glitches on that going through here. And then this thing will stay asserted until this next one comes along and sees that nice 0 beforehand with all the glitches all settled out of it. And then it'll go down to 0. Okay? So that's ACG. And then we want this nice clock here going into this flip-flop. So what do we get here at clock 0? This is the clock 0 specifically for the accumulator. So we'll say this clock 0 for the accumulator. For the accumulator only, right? So if we NOR these two symbols, NOR these two signals, okay, the inverted one, so yeah, it's ugly. I didn't draw it very well, but it's going to come along here, and it's going to take the inverse of this clock 1, right, and invert that and get a nice kerchunk here. And then when it sees either one of these guys drop, it's going to drop here nicely. No glitches. Okay. So the thing is, we have a nice up here and a nice down here, right? And that's the point of this flip-flop, sticking this flip-flop in here. All right. So that's how that works. And I think this ends up being Q bar and Q, right? Because you're just passing this signal through here, and you want it active low because of the NOR gate. So that's if you see this, if you look through the files, like for the accumulator was a acl.mod. In that file, you'll see the flip-flops defined like this. One flip-flop, a clock gating flip-flop, and that's how it works, drawn out in schematic form. So that will hopefully, oh, there's a clock signal maybe shown a little better in frame here. Clock 0, and again, it's gating off this ACG, which comes out of here, and ORed with the clock 1 signal coming out of here. So when these are both 0, well, the inverse of this is 0. So when this is 0 and this is a 1, then you will get the output from here. And the clock 1 is going to lead this thing changing a little bit so that you basically just get this nice clean clock pulse out of it here with no glitches. No glitches here. No glitches here. All the glitching that might have been on this AC ALU was taken away because it's put in through a flip-flop at these halfway points in the cycle to make a nice, clean, glitch-free um, pulse there. Okay, so that's how this works. Now you say, "Well, geez, that's a lot of flip-flops." Well, you only have to make one of these, right? You only have to make one of these circuits, and it can feed all 12 flip-flops. Well, it's the fan in of this um, is each clock input is a fan in of 2, and you have 12 bits. Well, the length is the 13th bit, so there's actually 26 bits. So you just need 3 NOR gates, right? Because each NOR gate can drive 10 outputs, so you just need 3 of these NOR gates. But only need one of these flip-flops, right? And only one of these inverters, and just 3 NOR gates, which these flip-flops can easily drive. The flip-flop and inverter can easily drive 3 NOR gates. So that's all you need. You don't need to make 12 of these is the main point. Just one to switch the accumulator on and off. So that's a little clock gating circuit. Okay, you can't. Main point is you just can't stick an AND gate in here because you'll get glitches in there and it messes the timing up. So you need a flip-flop. All right. So that's a little video there. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Helps you understand it if you're trying to. All right. Thanks.